So for liability, we have limited liability companies and unlimited liability companies. So what are unlimited liability businesses or companies? These are businesses where there is no legal difference between the owners and the business. They are sometimes called unincorporated business. So everything is carried out in the name of the owner or owners. So when we talk about unlimited liability business, this kind of business does not have a separate entity from the owner. So that means the business is not separated from the owner of the business. So whatever happens to that business affects the owners of the business. That's why we call such business unlimited liability or unincorporated business. Then we go to limited liability business. These are businesses that have legal identities separate from their owners. They are sometimes called incorporated business. So for a limited liability company or for a limited liability business, the owner is separated from the business. So the owner has a legal entity from the business. So whatever happens to the business, it does not significantly affect the owner of the business. So in case there's a debt in the business, the owner would only lose the amount of money invested in the business. No properties will be lost. Is it clear? Yes. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of unlimited liabilities? 1, business owners are exposed financially to the failure of their businesses. So for unlimited liability business, the failure of that business exposes the owner. So whatever happens to that business automatically affects the owner of the business. 2, owners of unlimited liability business are liable for any unlawful acts committed by the owners or employees. So whatever happens, whatever offense that the owner of the business committed, it affects the owners. And whatever an offense the employees of the business committed, it affects the business and the owner of the business. 3, they sometimes find it easier to raise finance because lenders will be repaid if a business defaults. So most of the time they might get finance easily because lenders, people that borrow them money, knows that if they are unable to pay, their property will pay for it. Do you understand? Because they can transfer their debt to their own personal wealth. So because of that reason, they might be able to get finance from any source. So we'll go on to disadvantages and advantages of limited liability. So for limited liability, 1, financial liability is limited to the amount of money they invested in the business. One of the advantages of a limited liability is that you can only lose the amount of money you invested. So whatever happens to that business, you won't lose your personal wealth or personal property to the business. 2, shareholders have protection from legal claims on the business. So if the business is having issues with government or having court cases, it does not affect the owners of the business or the shareholders. Because shareholders' private assets are protected, limited companies may find it easier to raise large amounts of money from investors. Investors will be willing to buy more shares because they know that they know the risk that is involved. That they know that, the only thing we could lose is the amount of money we invested. So this might allow them to buy more shares because their risk is known. Is it clear? Yes. So we go to choosing appropriate finance. What is finance? Finance is the disbursement of funds from the surplus units of the economy to the deficit unit. So as a business, how do you use the appropriate finance? So how do you know the appropriate finance? You get to know based on different factors. Number 1, whether short-term or long-term finance is needed. So if your business needs a short-term finance, that means you needed money for a short-term purpose, then there's a type of finance you source for. And if you need money for a long-term purpose, there's a kind of finance you use. For a short-term purpose, you might use an overdraft or a trade credit. For long-term, you might need a bank loan or debenture. The financial position of the business. If a business financial situation is not stable, it may find it difficult to source for finance, especially for the long term. So the stability of your business might also determine if you are going to be able to get a long-term finance or a short-term finance. Do you understand?
Yes.
3, the type of expenditure for which the money is needed. So we have 2 types of expenditure. We have capital expenditure and revenue expenditure. So if it is for revenue expenditure, that's day-to-day running of the business, short-term finance is enough for that. But if it is for investment, like maybe buying machinery or equipment, you might need a long-term finance. So the kind of expenditure you want to incur will determine the kind of finance you use. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Also the cost. Businesses will prefer sources and methods that are less expensive in terms of interest payments and administration cost. So even if you want to source for finance, you think of the ones that are less expensive in terms of the amount of money you pay back, in terms of interest, and the cost of your administration getting that finance. So the cost is also a factor that determines if you source for a short-term finance or a long-term finance. The legal status of the business, the kind of business you do. Is it a limited liability or unlimited liability? That can also determine if the source of finance you could use. So we go to finance appropriate for unlimited liability business. When we talk about unlimited liability business, we're talking about business that are not separated from the owners. So what kind of finance would they be able to get? 1, personal savings. Because it's your business. So most of the time, you have to put your own money into the business. That's personal savings. 2, retained profits. Most of the time, for retained profit, a business that is successful will only have retained profit. If you are starting up a business, you have not even made profit. So retained profit will be for businesses that have already been established. Maybe a sole trader business that has already been established, a partnership business that has already been established, that has made profit. So you can put the profit back into the business. But you would have paid your interest if you have any loan interest to pay. You would have paid your taxes if you have any to pay before you put back the rest into the business. Mortgage. Yeah, these are loans that you get with collateral. You need some collateral to get the loan. Unsecured bank loan. So these are loans that the bank will give to you. But they will give it to you based on maybe your reputation or based on how you have your market situation or your financial situation. But they are unsecured loans. So you don't need any security. You don't need any collateral to get them. Peer-to-peer lending, P2P. So this is where small businesses can raise finance through dedicated websites. So you can raise finance through some websites. You don't need to know them. They don't need to know you. The main objective is to make profit. Crowdfunding. So you can also source for finance through crowdfunding as a small business or as an unlimited business. So how do you do that? You convince a large number of people to contribute a small amount of money for you to start up the business. Then we have bank overdraft. A bank overdraft is another sort of finance for a limited liability company. How? You only withdraw more than what you have in your bank account. Is it clear?
Yes.
Then we have the grants, which are a free loan. You can get this from government or maybe from friends and family without paying interest. Is it clear? Mm-hmm. Then we have finance appropriate for limited liability companies. We're talking about a private limited company or a public limited company. Generally, limited liability business, particularly PLCs, have a much wider range of funding opportunities. They are large business. They are established. So they have access to finance. So one of the finance they could have access to is share capital. They could raise large amount of money from the sale of shares to the public. Is that clear? Yes. Debentures. They could get a long-term loan for over 20 years. Retained profit. Because they are established already, so they can put back money into the business. The profit they make, they can put it back into the business. When they have paid their dividends to the shareholders, when they've paid interest on loans, and they've paid taxes. So the amount of the profit left can be put into the business. That's retained profit. Is it clear? Mm-hmm. Venture capitalists. For venture capitalists, they make finance available. But most of the time, when they make this finance available, they buy shares too. They buy shares into the business. But the difference between them and business angels are that they put so much money than business angels. Do you understand venture capitalists? They put so much money into a business than business angels. So for business angels, they also they give finance to businesses by being part of the owners of the business. Do you understand?
What's the difference between them and shareholders?
Shareholders buy shares. These people don't buy shares.
Don't to become.
They put money into the business.
But they don't work. They
No.
just put money.
Yeah. By getting certain stake from the business. By paraventure, they'll become shareholders of the business. But it's not like preference shareholders.
Okay, yeah, they have.
Maybe ordinary shareholders.
Okay.
Is it clear?
Yeah.
Any question about it?